Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Martisiute, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this online policy dialogue organized jointly by the European Policy Centre and Danish think tank EUROPA. Danish presidency is coming to an end after a very busy 6 months, and so the objective of today's event is to assess the accomplishments, the milestones, and challenges tackled by the Danish presidency in the domain of security and competitiveness. Denmark kicked off the presidency at a critical time for Europe in the context of some of the most seismic shifts in the geopolitical domain and transatlantic relations, with the motto, "A strong Europe in a changing world." And oh boy, the world changed and continues to change to the extent that our policies and societies are struggling to keep up. And the question is, where does that leave Europe, and what has become of Europe in this rapidly changing geopolitical landscape? We will be looking at both political and technical questions of the presidency, examining how Denmark advanced its priorities in a complex geopolitical context. And to discuss these matters, we are joined by wonderful speakers. We do have Jonas Bering Liisberg, Danish State Secretary for European Affairs and the Arctic. He has for the moment a bit of a technical problem to connect, but we hope to get him at any moment during this event. Next is Iben Schacke. She's an analyst and Chief Communications and Administration Officer at think tank EUROPA, and Karen van Loon, Research Fellow, Clingendael. We've also planned to have a representative from the Cyprus Presidency in order to draw on the applications for the next 6 months. However, the person was not able to join, but we still hope that this event will provide a good platform for the upcoming presidency as well. And before I turn to the speakers, I would like to briefly say to the audience online that you're most welcome to participate throughout the whole 1 hour of this event by typing in your questions in the Q&A of the Zoom, and I will read out your questions as we go, and if not as we go, then certainly I'll raise some of them as we approach the end of this event. And with that, I would like now to turn to our speakers. Iben, this has been really busy 6 months for the presidency. What is your overall assessment of the Danish presidency, particularly given the very tense geopolitical context where indeed the unity of member states is very important for the success of the files? What would you highlight as the main wins of the presidency, and what, in your opinion, didn't go as planned?
Okay, I think I will start with sort of 5 general observations. I'll try to make them short. The first observation is that the Danish presidency has been more ambitious than the last one we saw. It had more informal ministerial meetings, more meetings in general, more priorities. But it's also worth noting, really, that the presidency has been forming its priorities very close to the general priorities of the European Commission. So in general, the Danish presidency has not had a lot of sort of national things on its agenda. So it has been competitiveness and security as the 2 overarching priorities and that we have seen. And it is, of course, also unwavering support for Ukraine, including enlargement, has been a very strong priority, as has all the EU defensive initiatives. And then competitiveness with what you can call maybe a green twist. And I can come back to what that sort of implies. Migration and the negotiation box on the MFF have, of course, also due to the calendar, been a priority. We have seen that the volatile international environment that you were pointing to, Maria, in the beginning is, of course, something that early on affected the Danish presidency, then you going in. And this is the second observation, that it would take a lot of energy sort of just to deal with incoming crisis. And of course, the Danish presidency has been proven right in that we have seen the transatlantic relations deteriorate. We have seen trade issues. We have seen fights over EU's digital rules. And now, of course, you have the ceasefire negotiations. And that is something also, I guess, for the Cypriots and any other presidency taking forward, is that you need to leave a lot of room in the presidency for dealing with these crises. So that's a sort of a lessons learned that that the Danish presidency from the beginning actually also had as part of their program, and probably leaving more room for crisis and maybe less for national priorities than would have been the case maybe 5 years ago. The third observation I want to make is that there has been a lot of progress on defense under the Danish presidency. We've seen the closing of the negotiations of the EDIP. We have seen passing on the 18th and 19th sanction package. We have seen a lot of support for Ukraine in many ways, although, and this is important because it was a priority for the Danish presidency going in, we have not seen much progress on the formal enlargement process. There's still at least one country blocking opening negotiations with Ukraine, and that has been somewhat of a disappointment. Other than that, we have also seen like another issue I want to highlight, mainly because it also shows something what it means to have a presidency, was an agreement that was reached in the council on the common position on the child sexual abuse regulation. Here, the Danish presidency came in hard and said that you needed monitoring, also a private conversation, in order to fight child abuse online. And that, of course, caused a stir, and I think was a reflection of the fact then that the trust in authorities in Denmark is very high, and maybe that is not paralleled in other parts of Europe. The fourth observation is that the Danish presidency has made a lot of headway on the competitiveness agenda, especially when it comes to the omnibus regulations, even though there has been a lot of stir, particularly in the European Parliament. The Omnibus 1 was agreed on, and I think that was seen as a win, so to speak, for the Danish presidency. But the Danish presidency has struggled a little with convincing other member states that competitiveness must be green. It was a very long, I think, whole night negotiation to get agreement on the 2040 climate goal. And there are also been sort of a general difficulty in persuading other member states that energy should be sustainable energy, not just because it's green and these days sometimes also cheaper, but also because it's a security issue, and it's what needs to happen for Europe to be autonomous. And that argument hasn't settled generally with a lot of other member states. The last point I want to make is that the migration debate, and this is kind of interesting because even though Denmark has an opt-out on a lot of the EU's migration policy, it's actually been a very active voice on the migration agenda and has managed, I think, to move the rest of Europe a little bit in the direction of where Denmark has been for many years. And I think especially because this has been also spearpointed by the Prime Minister's office in Denmark, is one of the takeaways. It's not like there has been a lot of migration legislation, but there has been certainly a lot of debate and a lot of ideas. And in that debate, Denmark has been very operational. So those were my first remark. But overall, I think it has been a successful presidency for Denmark. There are, of course, many issues that have not been solved, and the most important one, and which would set this presidency, I think, apart from just a regular presidency, would of course be if there is agreement found these hours and days on the financing for Ukraine. That would make it a different presidency and one to be remembered. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Iben, for this comprehensive assessment and sharing your observations, indeed varying from defense and security, but also bringing in migration, which is also a security matter, but also
Yes.
competitiveness and how hard it can be to drive, indeed, the unity and convergence of different member states. I do think we now have the Danish State Secretary with us. I would like to ask Mr. Jonas Bering Liisberg, do you hear me? And can you speak up? Hello? I think there might still be.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes.
can, and such a
All
pleasure
right.
to welcome you. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
to you and to the technical
I-
team of VPC.
I'm
Hello.
glad it worked out. I'm on a phone from Strasbourg, and I had some technical issues, so you'll be hearing my voice only. I hope that works out. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to Iben for making my job easier, because I think she gave a very accurate account of the main files and characteristics of the past almost 6 months of the Danish presidency. So I will not, I think, be able to add much on specific files, but I could perhaps give you an overall sense of where we are now in the final work week. We hope the final work week of our presidency, and maybe start by highlighting what is still open and something we hope we can make progress on and close. And even mentioned the financing of Ukraine. I think that is absolutely the most important issue, maybe not just for this week, but for the past semester as well, to make sure that the leaders give a strong signal that we will continue to support Ukraine financially, militarily, and that signal will not only help Ukraine maintain its defense and its society running, but also send a very strong signal to Putin that he will not benefit from maintaining his current position that seems to exclude progress on ceasefire negotiations. So that is absolutely the key file for this week. Coreper is working night and day on this, so are the leaders. And I don't think there's much news I can share at this point, but we're still confident that the leaders will come to an agreement as they announced already in October they would. Another open file for this last week is also important. It's the Mercosur agreement, a bit of a cliffhanger. We're as a presidency seeking to find a qualified majority to approve the proposal of the Commission to sign the agreement this week. On Saturday, the Brazilian presidency of Mercosur is invited for signature, and the numbers still don't add up. But I'm in Strasbourg to have, on behalf of our ambassador in Brussels, the trilogue on the so-called safeguard measures, the safeguard regulation that would, I hope, if we clinch a deal with the Parliament this afternoon, be able to convince more member states to go ahead as soon as possible and not run the risk of this agreement failing after 25 years or more of negotiations just before the end of the Brazilian presidency of the Mercosur, with all the things going on geopolitically, not to speak of our competitiveness. I think this is an important test of European resolve on both geopolitics and trade and competitiveness. But let me just turn back then to what our presidency has been about. It's our 8th presidency of the Council of the European Union. So we do have a bit of experience, but 13 years apart, we've had to prepare very intensely and relearn things. I was involved in the previous presidency myself, and things change along the way. But I think we've managed to refine the competences and energy to carry out a presidency that has made sure that we don't waste opportunities to make Europe stronger, to make progress on the most important files. And as Iben said, the priorities have been in complete alignment, I think, with the overall strategic priorities of the European Council and the Commission on security and defense, as well as competitiveness. And we've tried to focus also on the green aspect of competitiveness and security. And we managed that, I think, under difficult circumstances, but it's certainly an area of European policymaking that's under pressure for many reasons. If we look to the security agenda, broadly speaking, I think the sanction packages against Russia are also worth mentioning. The Repower EU agreement, the European Defence Industry Program, as well as the push for capability coalitions among member states to address the critical capability gaps in our defence or air defence. This was something that played an important part of discussions in Copenhagen for the summit there. And we're making a lot of progress on that as well. Migration was mentioned. You could see that as part of the idea. There's a trilogue also today in Strasbourg on one of the migration proposals that is on the definition of safe third countries and the possibility in EU law for member states to have agreements with third countries on reception facilities. That's quite a breakthrough in the migration debate in the EU, supported by more and more member states as well as the Commission. So that I think that's an important development also. On enlargement, yes, we did not manage to convince Hungary to agree on opening clusters with Ukraine, despite efforts by all institutions and member states. But we did manage to make progress at the technical level, which may sound boring, but is in fact, I think, important because it makes sure that we don't don't waste time once there's agreement again among the 27. And this front-loading method, as we call it, was politically validated at a meeting just this month in Lviv in Ukraine by the 26 member states supporting it, as well as the Commission and Ukraine. And I think particularly with the doubt about the anti-corruption efforts of Ukraine, we also managed to send a very strong signal that we still expect Ukraine to continue efforts. And I think Ukraine is also proving that this is still a high priority. So that's also, I think, a fairly positive outcome of the presidency's priority of enlargement and Ukraine, given the difficult political circumstances as well as difficult circumstances in Ukraine itself. But on enlargement, I think we also proved during this semester, all of us in the Council, that the momentum we've been speaking about on enlargement is a reality, not just for Ukraine, but certainly also for the Western Balkans, with the opening of all clusters with Albania, the closing of 5 chapters with Montenegro yesterday. So any story that Western Balkans is sort of falling behind and being ignored because of prioritization of Ukraine and Moldova, I think is not true. On the contrary, we've never seen so much progress in the past 2 years. I think we've had more IGCs on enlargement than we've had in the past 10 years, just in this year. So on competitiveness, I think Iben also mentioned the main highlights. The omnibus, of course, work was important. We managed 3 agreements with Parliament and Council positions on all 6 omnibuses until recently. Now there's 2 additional ones that the Cyprus Presidency will work hard on. And the 2040 climate target, of course. And we also made a lot of work on the MFF, which is, of course, also about both security and competitiveness. reorienting our priorities of the budget. That's going to take a lot of more negotiations in the coming presidencies. So that would just be some highlights. And I think the general rules for presidency work, of course, apply to us as all other presidencies. It's about preparation. It's about working well with institutions, particularly the European Parliament, and about being open and listening to all, but also setting, clear political priorities and showing ambition. And I think we've tried our best doing that. And I think Iben is right that the domestic political priority of the presidency and of our EU member state is perhaps at a peak these days in Denmark, with opinion polls showing record high support for EU membership and all the priorities of our presidency, basically. So that's been, I think, a very good context for us to do the presidency job. Thanks.
Thank you so much for highlighting so many different strands of policies and your work, both balancing between what was achievable and where there is clear momentum, and those files where perhaps the expectations were high, but there was a bit of a struggle, particularly in this very difficult geopolitical time for Europe. I have one follow-up question, State Secretary, for you. You started by talking about Ukraine, and financing for Ukraine remains an open file. Since you, as a presidency, act, so to say, as an honest broker in trying to create convergence in member states' positions, I think there's overall a consensus that the war in Ukraine and Europe's defense and security situation is, existentially important. I wanted to ask you, why is it so hard to sell still in many capitals the need for, continued financing for member states? Because this is not a new matter. Many presidencies have dealt with it, at least since 2022, if not earlier. Could you share some of your impressions of views from this, unity of action among member states, and why is this still, though so existentially important, as we say, verbal in our political declarations, when it comes to practice, is a lot more complex?
No, I think there are a lot of factors involved why this is so difficult. Of course, we could start by perhaps mentioning the new American administration, which I think has created some uncertainty about the direction, but has also increased the need to provide assistance to Ukraine because there is no more financial support coming from the US, regardless of whether we make progress on peace and so on. So that, you could say, has made it more urgent. But at the same time, many member states are facing deep economic issues, budgetary concerns, high debt rates, also political concerns internally with, if not anti-Ukraine, at least EU-skeptical populist parties gaining ground in opinion polls. And on top of that, there's geography. I mean, some member states are more concerned. For some member states, this is more existential than for others. But I think overall, I would say that the solidarity and the unity is still very strong, even if the ability or political acceptability of high financial contributions is perhaps more challenged these days. But I'm confident that there will be support from the EU. The question is how, and there may be some incremental steps along the way, as we've seen in the past. But I think what we've seen from the major member states and the institution is still a very, very strong support for Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Let's hope indeed, particularly this critical week for Ukraine, that we will see some tangible results and big decisions taken. I would like now to turn to Karen. Karen, you've heard Iben, you've heard the State Secretary share their assessments. What would be your take on the achievements, but perhaps also some of the challenges that the Danish presidency faced? If you could share your perspective, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to join this discussion, and I'd like to build on the excellent comments that the other speakers already made. For me, it was fascinating to hear both from the Danish perspective and the overall goals and ambitions, but also the behind-the-scene peek that State Secretary gave us. So building on that, I'll look back at the presidency, and I think it's clear that Denmark set itself a very ambitious objective. Maria, you already mentioned the slogan for presidency, a strong Europe in a changing world, and that ambition was more than appropriate, I think, given the context. We've talked a lot about the ongoing war in Ukraine, the economic pressure at home, but also externally, the global environment increasingly shaped by strategic competition. So the Danish had a lot on their plate. So it's useful now to look not only at what was delivered, but also at how the presidency's objectives translated into outcomes under these constraints. And I'll start with security and defense, because that was the core of the Danish agenda. And Denmark's stated objective was to strengthen Europe's ability to defend itself, sustain support for Ukraine. This is still very much an open file, and accelerate defense industrial cooperation. So one concrete file that was already mentioned by both of the other speakers, but it was an ambition translated into a real, albeit incomplete, progress. It was the European Defense Industry Program, EDIP. So the Danish presidency prioritized moving EDIP forward as a way to strengthen joint procurement, also to scale up industrial capacity, and to better integrate Ukraine's defense industry into the European defense industrial base. So while this is still very much work in progress, it's a very important step that has been achieved during the presidency. But EDIP has helped anchor defense discussions in practical questions, and rather than the abstract capability goals. So at the same time, the most difficult issues around long-term financing, risk sharing, sustained demand signals, they were not resolved. And to be fair, this is not something you can do within the term of one presidency. So this is by no means a criticism towards the Danish presidency. This is more the way these things go, of course. It does highlight a recurring gap between Europe's defense ambition and the political willingness to commit resources over the long term. And again, this is an EU-wide issue. This is not linked to a specific presidency. It is something that we will have to deal with in any case. More broadly, the Danish presidency played a stabilizing role. It helped maintain EU unity on Ukraine. At the moment when fatigue was visible, it ensured continuous momentum on defense industrial readiness, joint procurement, military mobility. That form of continuity matters. The State Secretary already mentioned sometimes there's technical things that happen behind the scenes that might not be the most exhilarating from the outside, but it is very important work that needs to be done. And it's not really a visible headline breakthrough, but it is something that matters in the long run. So I think in this case, the Danish presidency delivered on quite a few fronts as well. Let's shift to competitiveness. Denmark's objectives were wide-ranging, and both speakers already gave us a spectrum of topics that were included: strengthening growth, simplifying regulation, aligning the green transition with industrial strengths in practice. So the presidency focused on implementation and simplification rather than launching many new initiatives, even though there were some. This helped avoid regulatory overload. It kept files moving. It also meant that deeper structural issues, notably energy costs, investment gaps, they remain unresolved. And again, this is not an issue that could be solved in 6 months. And they will shape the agenda in 2026. So this is something for the Cyprus presidency. A particularly revealing area was trade and economic security. especially relations with the United States. Here, the broader strategic context is essential. The US national security strategy treats trade, industrial policy, and supply chains as instruments of national security. So they're not just economic tools, they are seen as instruments of national security. So that framing helps to explain why tariff risks persisted, why disputes over green subsidies remain unresolved, and why a comprehensive EU-US trade deal was never realistic during this semester. And against that backdrop, Denmark's objective was not to transform the transatlantic trade relationship, but to manage the asymmetry. I think they did that in a very pragmatic way. The presidency helped keep the EU united. It supported the Commission's firm but also restrained approach. It avoided escalation at a time when transatlantic security cooperation, especially on Ukraine, remained indispensable. So this was also diplomatically quite a feat to navigate. So across these areas, I would say a consistent pattern emerges. So the Danish presidency was ambitious in its framing. It was cautious in its execution. It was selective in the delivery. And several files, including long-term defense financing linked to EDIP, parts of economic governance, elements of the trade and neighborhood agenda, they were managed rather than resolved. Again, given the time span of 6 months, not unusual. And this reflects to me the geopolitical pressure, but also institutional timing and a realistic assessment of what was politically achievable. So I'd like to conclude with a final reflection. And to me, the Danish presidency, it did not meet all the stated objectives. They were extremely ambitious, but it did help ensure that the EU remained steady and that it remained at a time when strategic ambition was colliding with hard constraints. So in today's environment, I think that form of leadership, it's not always visible, but it's increasingly indispensable. And I think I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Thank you, Karen. Super interesting. And thank you indeed for highlighting both the geopolitical context and the specificities of Denmark driving the variety of very ambitious files, but also acting as a stabilizer in what is really very stormy waters in the rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Karen, I have a question for you. You highlighted quite a few times the transatlantic dimension. And, you know, let's be very honest, it does create an opportunity because it does, in a way, forge Europeans to come together and act with more, you know, haste, perhaps. But at the same time, it is driving wedge between some of the member states. And this is actually openly stated by the Americans. I wanted to ask you, you know, if we are really to achieve competitiveness and growth in Europe, if we are really to contribute to Europe's defense industrial readiness and, you know, plug our capability gaps. I mean, how can we do that when America is, you know, imposing tariffs on us, when they're putting pressure every step of the way? And how do you think this could have affected the performance of the presidency?
Well, it is a very delicate question, of course, because that pressure is there. It's not likely to go away in the coming years, and it's something that Europe will need to navigate. But I do think that certain steps, again, EDIP has been mentioned many times already, there is within the EU a stronger sense of, okay, we need to do this by ourselves, the whole discussion about strategic autonomy. It's still a very long process, and might not be the most popular answer. Maybe this is not something that can be achieved in the short term EU-wide, but I think with certain coalitions of leading member states, you can already take certain actions that hopefully then in the longer run will be adopted by all 27 member states. But I think you see in many countries that those things are moving, and I think the Danish approach to handling these type of files, I think, is a very useful model and constructive way forward for the EU.
Iben, would you agree with what Karen is saying? Would you like to add anything on this transatlantic imperative and its impact in forging or dividing perhaps the member states on some of the key files on competitiveness and security?
Yeah, there's no question that the current administration is a destabilizer and not a stabilizer in Europe. And for sure, we will see also going forward, I think, meddling on behalf of the American administration. Maybe that will change after the midterm next November, who knows? But there is a tendency also for there being a discrepancy about what you read in the press and your impressions there, and then the negotiations in the council, where my impression is that a lot of the divisions that you see here don't necessarily direct that is that not necessarily that hard to link to the U.S. administration, but there's no question that the Americans are going to try to divide and conquer and also go after individual countries on the files that mean something for them. So, for instance, on the digital legislation, but also, of course, on trade issues, where they will try to treat member states differently. Yeah.
I would like to bring in one region and take, so to say, advantage of the fact that we are all here with extensive experience on the Arctic. And I would like to mention Arctic for two reasons. One, because it is one of the prime examples where the security imperatives and where competitiveness comes into play, and it is right in the center in view of, Arctic being a strategic frontier when it comes to diversifying energy sources, digitalization, but also taking into account the needs of indigenous people. And also reducing potential our dependencies on critical raw materials. From the securities perspective, again, we see very dangerous rhetoric from some of our allies when it comes to the Arctic. We see hybrid attacks in terms of, cutting undersea cables or GPS jamming and spoofing. I wanted to ask, starting perhaps with the State Secretary, if that's okay. Has the Danish presidency, or how has the Danish presidency navigated these subjects, and has Arctic featured in your work, and where is the added value that you could bring here, or the Arctic could bring to the EU?
Well, it's a very interesting case of the US maybe bringing Europe closer together. It's not the Arctic affairs has not been an important element of our presidency. It's not really been on the agenda either from the national side, but it has figured in various respects during this semester. I think the most memorable Arctic discussion that I can think of was the speech of Greenland Jens Nielsen before the European Parliament plenary in October, a full plenary standing ovation from all parliamentarians on his points about the need for Europe and Greenland to work closer together in light of the American statements and interest in Greenland, and the points you made about competitiveness and security and raw materials included. And we've seen also during this semester the MFF proposal by the Commission proposing to double the already quite significant annual investments of the European Union into cooperation with Greenland. So these are examples of very positive developments on a difficult background for us and for Europe, with the American administration's statements about Greenland, the Western Hemisphere, and also Europe, including in the new national security strategy. So I think it's certainly part of the European agenda. It's not been a priority of the presidency as such, but it has come up.
Thank you. Would Karin or Iben would like to come in and add something as to where how Arctic features also in this security and competitiveness? Because let's be honest, it's one of the areas where indeed there's clear added value to these topics.
Maybe I can just add Greenland is, of course, of immense importance in Denmark. We have seen, I don't think we have ever seen that many important figures turning up in Nuuk as we have seen the past year. It's it's just to say that it is then an important issue also for the European Union about extracting raw materials in Greenland. That's a very expensive affair, and you would have to build a business model for it to happen, which is not there, I think, at the moment. But it is, of course, also an issue that will recur, especially if China tightens their export controls.
Thank you, Karen. You have been researching this region for many years. Anything you would like to add or highlight?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what the previous speakers said. And when it comes to access, there's a lot of talk about resources. Again, how financially viable are they? How environmentally safe is it to actually source them? But also about resilience. Talk about Greenland, but of course there are other parts of the Arctic that are in the EU or EU adjacent in any sense. Resilient infrastructure, I think, with the link you made already with hybrid attacks and those other things will become increasingly important. And also predictable maritime connectivity. This is not something that is limited to the Arctic, but it's certainly linked to it as well. When we see the activities of Russian Shadow Fleet, for example, you cannot separate one from the other. When it comes to security, and especially the traditional military security, this for the EU, of course, is a very tricky subject to navigate because not all the Arctic states are EU member states. So this is harder to handle. But when it comes to competitiveness, we see a lot of EU rhetoric regarding those economic activities that might be viable in the future in the Arctic. A lot of investments in building resilient Arctic communities. So those are issues that for the EU have been highlighted as priorities. So you do see an aspect of those practical everyday matters, so to say, that are more prominent on their agenda than actually addressing the greater geopolitical issues, which again is tricky because the EU is a small part of the Arctic region in general.
Thank you very much. I will turn now to, we have quite a few questions from our online audience. Thank you very much for your participation. So one of the questions is by Christian Brad Pettersen. He would like to talk about climate. He's saying on climate and 2040, the Danish minister Lars Agard is happy with the 2040 result because future policy will have to take the 2040 target into account. But given the difficult negotiations, do you see signs that support for climate is faltering among the 27 member states and will be more contested going forward? Would anyone like to address this question on climate and 2040? Perhaps this Iben or State Secretary?
I can just give few remarks, but I think it's the right question to ask. Of course, is European unity and ambition on climate faltering? I think there are signs that it is not. We have not. No member state, as far as I know, has questioned the objective of climate neutrality by 2050. And I think the institutions, the Commission especially, is doing, I think, a very solid work of maintaining the level of ambition while adjusting the measures we use to get there, and also explaining the competitiveness advantages of continue to invest in green transition technologies and jobs and infrastructure and so on, and the security advantages also related to more energy independence and so on. But it's certainly under pressure. I remember from our previous presidency, most recent presidency in 2012, coming out of the financial crisis, the debt crisis, that the green agenda was also under a lot of pressure. And so I think there will be cycles or cyclical changes and movements in the debate. Of course, globally also, the climate question is under a lot of pressure, with the US having withdrawn again from the Paris Agreement. So there are difficult circumstances. But I wouldn't say that the European Union and its member states are basically questioning the ultimate objective of climate neutrality by 2050, or the need for Europe to take leadership in this field or internationally. So that would be my assessment.
Thank you. I have another interesting question, even addressed to you on migration. You said that the EU countries have moved a little during the Danish presidency towards the migration policies that Denmark has had for some time. But the speaker is asking, but isn't it in fact a watershed? Because during the previous von der Leyen Commission, as he remembers, there were the safe third countries and return hubs was a big no-no. How would you
Yes,
answer?
I'm sorry if I gave the impression that it was a little. What I meant was that this was actually an agenda where the Danish presidency also where Denmark also helped push the agenda during its presidency. It's just to say not all the results was, of course, reached within this presidency. It's something that the Danish government has been working on for a few years, actually, trying to go from a position in Denmark where it was about Danish migration policy to actually move this on a European level. So that's just to say it's a more long-term agenda than what just took place within within the Danish presidency. But it is true that the EU agenda now resembles the Danish agenda a lot more than it used to.
Thank you. And I have another question. It is related to the green transition. The attendee is curious to know how can we talk, she says, about the Danish presidency focusing on green transition, given that we haven't done enough, or the person says we have been slaughtering sustainability reporting requirements in Europe. Karen or Jonas, would you like to answer that?
I can try to come in, and it also builds a bit on what was mentioned before about climate, EU commitments, EU ambition, lack thereof. You see that there is a change there, and I would say there is a recalibration of where priorities lie. There is a shift towards what's possible pragmatically, what is politically viable in the member states. So you see this issue, it's more viewed through a lens of security and competitiveness and affordability, not so much the moral argument you used to hear a couple of years ago. So that is a shift already, and I think what this question refers to is similar. So it can look like hesitation, or you can frame it more strongly if you prepare to do so. But I do think it's a recalibration, and the ambition is still there. Implementation is harder under the current conditions and economic pressures that member states are facing. So I think we should also be pragmatic about what the EU can deliver on climate goals in a way that is economically and socially sustainable. So I do agree that when it comes to the reporting and these other issues, it's important to do so. But the EU is also comprises of many member states and institutions, so it is very tricky to navigate and streamline all of it.
Jonas, would you like to come in on this topic?
No, I think Karen covered it well. I would say maybe just at the point that in the European Parliament, the discussion is very different from the previous Parliament when it comes to the green transition, and this also, I think, limits the prospects of major breakthroughs in this field. But I think the agenda is kept alive, the objectives are still the same, and hopefully circumstances will be more conducive to making progress some years ahead.
Thank you. Staying on these same topics of competitiveness and security, I would like to throw in a question. You know, Europe hasn't overall been spending a lot on whether it is security or even technology and innovation compared to, say, for example, the United States of America or even China. And my question is, how can we facilitate, and looking forward a little bit into the upcoming presidencies and into the future, building on what has been achieved already, how can we facilitate this transition to clean energy or technological independence and defense readiness? How can we get there, particularly when we are facing such urgency and such major geopolitical shifts? Iben, would you like to come in first?
That's a very broad question, trying to answer many things. I mean, I think one step forward is actually the simplification of the MFF. Maybe that would be with the competitiveness fund, that would actually prove to be a help. Of course, the saving and investment union, also recommended by Draghi, completing that would be a very big step forward, because at least then it would be easier for European money to also be invested, I think, in Europe. And then keep searching for different models that work. Maybe some of the important projects of European interest will actually come up with something that works. I don't know. I think there will be many instruments that the EU will have to look to in the future, and probably also in general better cooperation between governments and European business would be part of the answer. But it's not an easy question.
And Jonas, where do you see security competitiveness moving forward? Yeah,
I agree with Iben that we have a lot of homework on internal reforms, and that's also an opportunity. There's a lot of potential to strengthen our economies through better single market legislation and investments, as Iben said, through the MFF and so on. There's of course also an external dimension to our geopolitical role, and again, I think the difficult circumstances also present some opportunities, because other countries, other important actors in the world are also seeking partnerships in the face of this great power struggle, or sometimes great power alignment we see between China, Russia, and the US, and that creates some opportunities geopolitically, also economically, for diversifying, and also seeking support for maintaining some of the institutions and rules that Europe must try to maintain. This is why I think the Mercosur agreement is an opportunity for Europe not to be missed, both economically and geopolitically. But it also goes for other partners in Africa, Southeast Asia, etc., Latin America.
Thank you. And Karin, I would like to ask you, also looking a little bit forward towards, the upcoming Cypriot presidency and also upcoming presidencies. What do you think is the most important lesson learned from the Danish presidency? Karin?
Yeah, I was muted. I'm sorry. So I think one of those things is to continue the Danish spirit of being able to navigate the upcoming issues, those unexpected issues, and to incorporate it in an already very challenging agenda, keeping the difficult files alive, especially when it comes to defense financing, industrial policy, energy security. So I think those, to me, would be the main topics keep on the agenda. Support for Ukraine, of course, and those open files that are still being discussed. Preparing decisions for the next institutional cycle.
Thank you. Iben, what about you?
I think forward, I said that in the beginning, and I think I'll just mention it again. I think there are two things to be said. One is that the presidency would have to look into a lot more about how to be flexible, because we will probably live through a lot of crises in the coming months. So the next presidencies will have to look at how to organize themselves so that they can plan, but also be flexible when the crisis hits the EU. I think the other sort of lesson learned that I think is maybe a little bit underestimated, but it's still important, that I've seen the past months in Denmark, is that there's a big learning process in having the presidency, that it's not just a question of the government's learning from being a presidency, as Jonas mentioned in the beginning, but it's actually also something that we experience in interest organizations and the wider society, that you have a sort of a heightened awareness of how the EU actually works and how you actually get to results, because sometimes the EU from the outside remains a little bit of a black box, where sometimes some results come out. So that sort of awareness is actually an argument for why you should still have presidencies.
And Jonas, looking back at those very busy 6 months, I'm sure there is a whole plethora of lessons learned, and I wondered, would there be anything you would do differently in hindsight on certain files or deliberations with member states or institutions? And then my other task would be, now that your presidency is coming to an end, what do you see as Denmark's main European task or responsibility?
Well, that's a lot of questions, but it's maybe when you're in the middle of it, it's too early to draw the lessons. But we're certainly going to try to draw lessons and share lessons with incoming presidency. We're already doing that, and there are a lot of general lessons learned that all presidencies learn and pass on. I touched on some of them in my introduction. I think. As Iben said, one lesson I take from the past almost 6 months is that rotating presidencies still make sense, and they make sense for the member state in charge, but they also make sense for the cohesive work mindset or structure or sense of co-ownership among member states in the council, and provide dynamics into the work of the institutions. And I'm of course it's perhaps a banal observation, but of course it helps when you're nationally also extremely aligned with the European agenda to be a presidency. And if you're not aligned to begin with, maybe it's a chance to catch up. For us, we were aligned to begin with, and I think that has also helped us set high ambitions. And we often, in our preparations, talked about this saying that you should under-promise and over-deliver, which is an excellent saying. But I think we also dared set some ambitious goals that, if we haven't set them, maybe we would not have been able to contribute as much as I think we have in. I think stabilizing, which is a good term, but also in moving forward some important discussions. So even if we didn't manage to deliver on all our ambitions, I think it's good to have ambitions as a presidency, but of course always in the spirit of being the midwife, so to speak, and seeking all the opinion of all member states and as broad consensus always as possible.
Thank you so much, Jonas, and thank you to all the participants. It's absolutely clear that the next 6 months and the next 6 months after will be absolutely critical for European defense and security, as well as economic growth and competitiveness. And what I'm hearing is indeed the necessity to remain ambitious, despite the fact that times are very challenging. And congratulations, Jonas, and all the speakers. for this event, but also congratulations to Denmark for delivering on such an ambitious agenda during such difficult times. And we hope that you continue to play a very critical role moving forward. Thank you very much also to our online audience. Thank you for great questions across various policy areas. It's been great having you. With this, I would like to close this event and wish you a very good week and festive season. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.